Welcome to today's webinar sponsored by Cotton Incorporated and brought to you by Cotton Works. My name is Marissa Sims and I am the Executive Account Manager at Cotton Incorporated, and we're pleased to connect with everyone today. At Cotton Incorporated, we bring a wide range of information, services, technical assistance, and innovation to help companies with their cotton business. Cotton Incorporated is a not-for-profit organization based in science and research, working to help companies be successful with their cotton-related business. Through cottonworks.com, we offer the best, most comprehensive portal in the industry for information, training, and assistance. Cottonworks.com is a free online resource for every aspect of cotton. We encourage everyone to register as a user and take full advantages of the resources available to you. As one of our many activities at Cottonworks, we are pleased to feature today's webinar, Shaping the Future of Performance. Let me remind you that you are free to submit your questions or comments at any time during this session, and we have saved some time towards the end of the webinar to answer as many of your questions as possible. I'm pleased to introduce today's speakers, Sabrina Mallon and Alexis Mondragon, both textile education consultants for Cottonworks. We look forward to hearing your remarks, and I'm going to turn the program over to you.
Hello and good afternoon. I'm glad to join you today. I am joining you guys from the West Coast. I am Sabrina Mallon, and so today we're really happy to take you through some information we'd love to share with you about body and shapewear. So I'm going to get us kicked off today to talk about some of the trends and kind of an overview of what we're going to be talking about today. If you guys will bear with me just for a second. We're going to start off talking about some overall trends that we're seeing in shapewear and bodywear today. So coming out of COVID, we saw that there was a continued trend in health and wellness, despite the fact that in a lot of places we're in a global downturn and recession. Consumers really still see the value in investing in healthcare and wellness. So despite the fact that maybe there's a challenge to their budget, people are still spending money on athletic wear, gym memberships, foods, things that will enhance their health and wellness, as well as there's a continued focus on sustainability and natural. There's definitely a push to see more natural product in the market. There's been a lot of talk about microplastics and how it's affecting our health and how the product that we're buying is contributing to microplastics, as well as a lot of consumers want to move away from our dependency on oil and move towards more natural fibers or bio-based fibers in the product that they're wearing and investing in their body. Cotton is a great product when people are trying to move away from microplastics or dependency on oil. Another thing that we've been seeing, especially over the last 10 years, is as the consumer is trending towards more revolutionary materials in shapewear and bodywear, they want things that are lighter, more refined, softer against their skin. We're seeing that this demand is driving innovation in our machine manufacturers that are helping us make textile today. And that really can be seen in international textile shows with the advances that they're making in new equipment. And we're going to go over some of the ways that some of this new equipment can help us make more interesting bodywear and shapewear and fabrics with jacquards and body mapping. So there's also been a push to no longer see shapewear and bodywear as this thing that we just put on when we work out or this thing to make us feel better about ourselves. It's become more of a luxe for some people. They don't want to just work out in it. They want to just feel good and look good all the time. So we're not just wearing this to work out, we're wearing this on errands. And we also see it as a treat for ourselves. Um, and so we're going to talk a little bit about this premium luxury today. Also, our consumer is a lot more educated on clothing than they've ever been. And there's definitely a demand for performance. They want fabrics and garments that move with them, have the durability that they need, and also they want it to perform for moisture management. So we're going to dive first into talking about fiber and yarn and what we're seeing that might be important for bodywear or shapewear. So we're going to start off about what are we looking for in shapewear and bodywear today. So we've already talked about the fact that sustainability and natural is pretty important to this consumer, and so they're looking for those kind of fibers. They're looking for fibers and yarns that are going to contribute to their product being durable and easy to care for. They just want to throw it in the wash. They don't want to have to deal with their product still smelling after they wear it. They want it to feel really comfortable against their skin, and they want it to feel breathable and able to move moisture. They don't want to feel like they're wearing a plastic bag, especially if this is something that they're living in 24 hours a day. They want to feel as good as they look. In addition, they really need fibers that are going to contribute to strength or stretch in the product that they're wearing. They want it to be able to retain its shape all day. If you're wearing leggings, you don't want to be halfway through the day realizing that the knees have bagged out in your leggings. You want to look just as good as you started. And so why today are we talking about cotton? Well, so the consumer demand is shifting, and cotton is definitely ready for that. 70% of consumers prefer activewear made with natural fibers like cotton. So they're looking for these performance properties in activewear like odor resistance, moisture management, and antimicrobial in their activewear and shapewear garments. So cotton is unique in that it has a moisture regain of 8.5% compared to other fibers like polyester, which is around 0.4%. So what does that mean? You're probably super curious. Really what that means is its ability to pick up moisture out of the air. So when you're wearing a garment made of cotton, that microclimate next to your body is more comfortable because that cotton picks up that moisture vapor off of your skin, and you just feel it feels more breathable and light. Now, most leggings that are worn today, 66% might be worn for lounging and 61 is light exercise. But now we're seeing a trend that consumers, almost 60%, 58% are now even wearing it for their errands, possibly even into the office. So cotton is going to allow us to be able to deliver what the consumers mostly care about, which is being comfortable, having some performance characteristics, and breathability. So I want to dive into when we're making yarn, and it's a spun yarn made of short fibers. There's two different processes that we can go to make that yarn and to line these fibers. So when our spun fibers are being opened up and the fibers are being aligned so that we're able to make them into a spun yarn, we can go through one of two processes. And so these two processes will align the fiber, remove shorter fibers, remove trash or impurities or little neps, which are little tangles in the fiber, in order to make a higher quality yarn, in order to make a nicer product. So the basic step that any spun fiber is going to go through is the carding process. So this carding process is where the fibers are brushed with metal wires to align the fibers. So what comes out of that carding process will be a sliver of yarn. And so you can see in this sliver of yarn that my fibers are starting to be aligned together. They're running parallel. And this sliver that comes out of this carding process is about the diameter of, say, a broomstick. And so this is the basic entry point in order to make spun yarn. So the next level to make an even more premium yarn would be a combing process. So the combing process is going to remove even more of these shorter staple yarns, which would allow you to be able to produce a yarn that's going to be stronger, maybe have a little bit more lustrous. And so that output of that combing process is making this roving, which is about the diameter of a pencil. So our entry point to be able to make a spun yarn is this carding process, which makes a sliver, and then it moves on to its yarn spinning process. But if I want a more premium product, if I'm looking to make something a little bit stronger, a little bit more lustrous, or it's going to be going into a ring spinning process, then I'm going to do that combing process, which is then going to make my roving. So both those processes are going to help us make a nicer yarn, and they're going to lead to this spinning process. So you might hear these terms kicked around, and when we describe some of the kind of shapewear that Cotton Incorporated has worked on, we're going to mention some of these terms. So I just want to ground you in that spun yarn, little filaments of yarn that are held together by twist, are done with one of these three processes. We have ring spinning, and we have open end, and we have air jet. So these are three different processes. So ring spinning is our oldest, and it's really kind of our gold standard. This process of spinning yarn and holding it together with twist produces the strongest yarn. It lets us produce the widest range of yarn sizes. So we can create a very small, fine yarn, which can make a beautiful, beautiful product. Open end is a little bit cheaper, and it has a little bit of a harsher hand, and it's used in cases where we want a product that is a little bit more even and consistent, and it's a little less expensive. And then the final one is air jet spinning, which can be used to create a less expensive yarn and is often used where we really want to eliminate pilling. Now I'm going to switch gears and talk to you a little bit about filament yarns. So filament yarns are made with synthetic fibers, fibers that may either be based on petroleum like nylon or polyester, or filament yarns can also be made using cellulosic material like products like Tencel or rayon, where we take a cellulose material, we break it down to its chemical forms, and that's then extruded through a spinneret. And so when we talk about filaments, we often talk about the filament count, the luster, the cross-section, and the texturizing. In a lot of cases in bodywear and seamless product, we will push to try to use lower filament counts or microfiber yarns for performance, for moisture management, and for really soft hand feels. Now, when we talk about yarns and fibers, I'm just going to ground you in quickly the different methods that we use to be able to refer to the size of the yarn numbering system, or the yarn count. So there's two different systems. There's indirect and direct. So with indirect, that's used for our spun yarns like cotton and wool, or possibly a polyester cotton blend. And so we express those in terms of lengths to weight. And those are things like cotton count, worsted count. Now, in the case of filament yarns, these man-made yarns, those may be called out as denier, tex, or decitex. Now, the thing that's very interesting about these two, when you compare them, and we broke them into two different classes, is with indirect, the larger the number, or the larger the yarn count, the actually smaller the yarn is. So when I refer to something as having a 50 singles in cotton count, I'm actually talking about a very, very small yarn. While in the direct system, it actually follows a direct way of thinking as far as I'm concerned. And that larger number means a larger yarn, and a smaller number means a smaller yarn. So if I'm referring to a fabric having a 70 denier, which is more something that we might want to use in performance product, then that would be a smaller yarn. So you can see on this image, I love this image because it really frames up that they're opposite of each other. Now I'm going to pop into one of the things that really helps us get the stretch and recovery that we want to see in shapewear and bodywear, which is spandex. So ironically enough, spandex is only around 1.1% of the global fiber production, but we're actually seeing it in about 80% of the product that we see out there. So spandex is a really unique fiber in the sense that we can't dye it. It typically only comes in clear, white, and black. It can stretch between 4 and 7% of its length. And whenever we use it in bodywear, we definitely have to be sure that we're going to cover that up since we can't dye it and it's limited in what colors it can come in. So I want to talk to you about a couple different ways that we might want to hide that spandex because we can't have it directly against our skin. And so some cases, what we're going to do is we're going to do an air jet covering, which we're going to use air to be able to cover it with another fiber to prevent you from being able to see it. And that's often used in denim. Single cover yarn are cases where we've wrapped a different fiber, whether it's spun or it's filament, around that spandex to kind of hide it from being seen. And then our final, most expensive version is we really want to take a higher denier spandex and use it in a product. So we'll wrap it not once, but twice, and we'll use it with a double cover product. So you can see that image with the blue yarns wrapping around that spandex to really make sure that we have good coverage. And you'll also notice on these different methods that I've shared with you, the more coverage that we get, the more expensive that yarn is as well. One of the most common ways, though, in knitting that we use spandex, and this is the easiest way, is to use the spandex without covering it at all. And we call that using bare spandex. So on the knitting machine, we'll plate that spandex, which means that we'll hide it behind the main body yarn. So in this particular example, you can see that we've got one yarn as the spandex and one yarn is the main body yarn. And as we're knitting it together, we're using that other yarn to hide that spandex behind it so that we can get coverage of that spandex, but we can still get that amazing stretch. So these are some of the most common ways that we're using spandex. Now, I also wanted to talk about spandex content and spandex sizes as it relates to different types of product that we may want to make. So in some cases, you'll hear someone say that they want to change the percent of spandex. And so these are things that we have to keep in mind. So in the chart that you see in front of you to the side, you'll see that we have the spandex denier, or the size of that spandex yarn. And you'll see the different sizes that we have listed. A 20 denier, 30 denier, 40 denier, and so forth, going up that axis. And then over to the side, you'll see boxes describing the kind of stretch that we want. So depending on the amount of stretch or power, we may have to adjust what size or what denier spandex that we use in order to get that stretch and recovery that we're looking for in product. So if we're looking for shapewear or leggings and bodywear, we're probably going to want to be more in that medium power stretch to get that stretch and recovery, and also increase the weight of that fabric to get that coverage and avoid having any kind of opacity issues. We don't want to have see-through spandex or bodywear. And so we'll do that by leveraging certain size spandex to increase the size, and then also to increase our percent spandex. Now, all spandexes that we may use are not the same. We may have to use different kinds of spandex based on our end use. We're going to talk to you a little bit about seamless product today. And we're using seamless product. We may be required to use a very special kind of spandex that would allow us to heat set that spandex using only steam. If we're looking for a particular kind of power or we need a particular kind of color fastness, we may select a different kind of product. Now, I also wanted to highlight for you, looking at yarn and looking at constructions, that Cotton created a really amazing collection highlighting kind of the future type fabrics using cotton content. So if you can check out the Cotton Incorporated, they have a trend page on their website. We've highlighted some of the examples of the fabrics. They created a collection that highlights different materials using spandex with a definitely trend relevant hand feel to these particular materials. And I wanted to kind of take a look at what kind of yarns did they leverage in order to be able to make these fabrics. So some of these fabrics that they have in this collection, they have looked at using these finer denier yarns. So earlier for the spandex and the finer yarn count for the cotton. So two of the fabrics that I have highlighted down below are these beautiful cotton blend fabrics. And they're using a very small combed compact ring spun product using a Pima or ESL cotton. And so what is Sabrina talking about here? So I am talking about they're using a finer yarn, an 80 singles, and in order to achieve that smaller, finer yarn, they're using the ring spinning method. And in order to make ring spin yarn, we have to do a combing process. So this combing process is removing some of these shorter staples to be able to create a much stronger yarn. In addition to that, to create that premium hand feel, we're also using Pima or ESL or longer staple cotton. So we've selected fiber that is much longer to create a stronger, more luxurious yarn. And then in order to create that stretch and recover, we're using around a 70 denier spandex. So some of the other fabrics that are used in this collection are using 40s, 50s, 80s, and even extremely fine and beautiful, beautiful cotton ring spun yarn in 100 singles. And then the other spandex sizes are listed there as well. So the last part I want to talk to you about with yarns and fibers is different methods that we can use to create heathers that will be used in there to create a really unique texture or look in the fabric. One of the most common ways that we can create a heather, especially in spun product, is by doing a fiber dye process. So part of the fiber will be dyed before the yarn is spun, and then as those two fibers are blended together, it will create a heather look. And there's an image there showing a fiber dye. Another way that we might be able to create a heather is mixing two different fiber types together, perhaps a polyester and a cotton. And then those two fibers are spun together through a ring spinning or an open end process. And then when that fabric is then dyed, one fiber is dyed with one fiber dye type and the other is dyed with another type, which will create a cross dye effect, which will create a really unique and beautiful heather that would allow a lot of flexibility for you to be able to change the color based on trends. And then the third one is for filament type yarns, where we'll intermingle two different types of fibers to be able to create a heather effect. So in the picture to the side, you'll see that there was a polyester filament and a cationic dyeable polyester, and those two were intermingled by shooting air into the bundles of fibers, and that creates a node that entangles them together, and then one of those fibers is then dyed to create a beautiful heather. So those are two ways that we might be able to create those kind of heathers. Now I'm going to hand it over to my colleague right now for her to share a little bit about circular knitting.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Sabrina. That was great. Love hearing about yarn, but now we're going to talk about the knitting processes for shapewear and the machine types typically used for shapewear, leggings, and loungewear. We're really looking at circular knitting machines and warp knitting machines. We don't typically use a lot of flatbed knitting machines because the cost is a lot higher. So we're going to typically only see circular weft for these types of products. So the categories for the machines, there are some limitations. I'm sorry, I think I missed one. There we go. Sorry. So we have different types of machines. So we have large diameter machines, which are typically for primarily cut and sew types of products because the diameter is really wide. You can get really large, big widths of fabric so that you can cut and sew those products. Your second one in the middle is called body size, where your diameter of your machine is a lot smaller, hence body size. So this is for your seamless product. The next one would be socks and hosiery, and that is pretty explanatory, but you can see that the diameter of the machine is even smaller. And so those how we kind of have a different range of diameters of machines. And within those machine types, we have limitations. And so our first limitation would be in single cylinder machines and single cylinder with dial plate. Those machines can only do single knit structures or single jersey structures, which means we are not able to do true ribs or interlocks or any type of double knit jacquards. The next types would be your double jersey or your double knit machines. These are the machines that you are able to do ribs structures, interlocks, double knit jacquards. And so these are the machines that you really need to know what your factory has so that you can design for those machines. So in single knit machines, you only have one needle bed. And so that's what is your limitation. Because you don't have a second needle bed, you're not able to do those rib structures. So you're only able to do jerseys, small patterns like piquets and little textures and yarn dyes and maybe some feeder stripes. And so this type of machine is fast. You can create really wide amounts of fabrics. Also in seamless circular, it's really fast to create those whole garments at a lower cost. Looking at the double knit machines, the difference here is you have two needle beds. You have a dial and a cylinder, whereas on the single knit machine, you only have a cylinder. So you're able to do construction stitch structures like ribs, double-faced fabrics, any types of waffles, pointelles, interlocks. You really don't have as many limitations when you have the two needle beds for what stitch structures that you can do. Your production speed is a little bit slower than single knit because your machine has to do the other functions, transferring and whatnot. So it's a little bit slower in terms of machine, but still your cost is really, really good in terms of seamless circular or for cut and sew products. You can also knit these fabrics pretty fast. So here's a video. It doesn't want to play. There we go. Here's a video of a single cylinder body sized machine. And so you can just see it's just knitting continuous tubes of body size. And this would just be used for cut and sew. Obviously, your body, your side seam is seamless, and so you don't have to cut and sew the sides, but you still have to cut the neckline, the armholes, and for this exact fabric, you would have to also cut the body length. We have capabilities of doing garment knitted lengths on these types of machines as well, but it just has to do with your production run and what types of products you're making. And those types of products are a little bit more advanced and a little bit more, they have a higher cost in production. So you can see all of those yarns kind of going into the circumference of the machine. So that's what makes it really fast. So you have an increased productivity compared to flatbed knitting. It could be up to 10 times faster in the knitting time. So it's really great for production of especially garments that you want to keep your costs low, like shapewear and activewear. You cut down a lot on waste when you're looking at seamless circular compared to even cut and sew. You're going to have a lot more waste in something that is completely cut and sew as opposed to circular seamless, which still has some cut and sew aspects, but not as much. And you can also create different functional areas within the garment. So you can body map in there, and you can also add logos, or you can knit in your sayings, or you can kind of play with it a little bit. And it also is a lot more comfortable without those side seams. Removing seams is always more comfortable with anything that's sitting close to the body. So we see a lot of these products that, we say seamless doesn't typically mean seamless when it comes off of these machines, because you still need horizontal seams like the armholes and the neckline. And also for a pant like this or a legging, you will need an inseam. But you can definitely remove those out seams, and any chunky starts or welts, you can remove any of those areas that are have a high abrasion on the body. And you can also knit in your logos. So as you can see here, we knit in our cotton logo on these leggings here, and you can put that anywhere on the body. It just has to be programmed in. So some design considerations when we're looking at shapewear is yarn choice. So Sabrina did such a good job with yarn. Does it have any type of performance enhancing technologies? What type of yarn? Is it ring spun? Those types of choices. Is it greige and you're going to dye it later? You have a lot of different considerations with yarn, but also with stitch structure. When we're designing the stitch structure, is it going to be body mapped? Is it going to be cut and sewn? Is the construction integrally knit in, or is it seamed? And also colorway and application. Is it garment dyed, printed? Does it have any type of application after the fabric's already been made? So those are some design considerations to think about. In seamless garment design, for this specific garment, we have planned out that we've picked the yarn with the spandex. This is a single jersey structure type of garment, so we're working on a seamless machine with outside seams in a single jersey structure. So this machine probably has a dial plate involved because it has some pointelle in there. And so we're going to want something that has a dial plate, but this has predetermined body length, predetermined body width, predetermined cut lines. We've added our own welt start, which is also, we removed the seam there. So it's going to be a little bit more comfortable type of garment. We look at fabric design for something like this. So within those little areas in body mapping, we can also design the fabric, or we can design overall fabric for the product. So what is jacquard knitting? A knitting machine that controls and allows individual feeds and needles to be controlled independently to create patterns. So designs can have multiple colors, yarn sizes, types of yarn combined, independent of different knitting stitches. So this is really great for piece goods, panels, or integrally knit garments, so seamless or fully cut and sew. So two different types of jacquard knitting for these products. We have full jacquard, which is an unrestricted selection of needles and yarn feeds. So all over and unlimited effect of the fabric roll and fabric panels. Then we also have a mini jacquard, which is a small repeat of pattern, and you have a restricted selection of needles and yarn feeders for. So your pattern width is usually limited to the number of needles that you can be selected mechanically, usually about 48 wales or less, and the number of yarns and feeds for the machine per revolution. So I'll show you on the next slide what that means. So here you have your single knit float back jacquard. This was made on a circular knitting machine that has a limitation. So when we look at the design of this structure, it's very small. You know, this is an all over repeat pattern. Your repeat is 20 wales by 20 visible courses. But the machine needed for something like this actually has to have 40 feeds on the machine. So it's actually something that requires a lot more feeds than you would think for such a small little pattern. But the way that circular machines work is when you have a two-color float back jacquard, you want to float the unwanted colors to the back. But when you have the feeds, you need 40 feeds because you have 20 visible courses. You double that because it's two colors. And so you have a little bit of limitations to what type of machine you can put this on, and you need a 40 feed machine for this. So double knit fabrics use a little bit more. You can use more than one color and type of yarn for the desired pattern. You have to gate the machine, which means you have to stagger or align your needles in a way that works for the stitch structure, which allows for multiple colors and types of yarn to be placed in the back of the fabric of unwanted colors, and you can use moisture management fabrics in these types of situations and applications. When we look at the assembly and construction of these types of garments, we really have to understand that we also need seams that work with the stretch of the fabric. And so we have to make sure that the seams have high strength and high stretch. They also need to be flat since they're really worn close to the body. You really don't want a lot of seam allowance inside, which is why we love seamless knitted garments, because removing seams always helps with comfortability. We also have to make sure that the seam thread does not shrink differently than the fabric. So we also have to make sure that we test and ensure that we have the same amount of stretch and recovery for within the seams as we do on the fabric. So out of comparing fully cut and sew leggings compared to something that's completely seamless, we have some benefits here. So in something that's fully cut and sew, we can use double knit structures alongside with single knit structures and not have to, have only single knit structures on one garment and only double knit structures on the other. So we can cut and sew these panels together. So I've taken two types of fabrics from our fabric library. One is an interlock fabric for a little bit more support and structure, and then jersey. Both have been treated with wicking windows, and you're able to have a completely cut and sew garment with the same amount of stretch or limited stretch in certain areas due to where we place that double knit structure fabric. The types of seams we usually see within these garments are overlock, a lapped or tucked stitch. We use a lot of cover stitch in any shapewear. We sometimes use bound edges, which we see on a lot of bras and types of sports bras. We have flat lock and overlock machines. And then we also sometimes use bonded or no sew types of seams, which are usually for, minimal bulk thread. And we also can have waterproof seams that way. So comparing the two, cut and sew and fully seamless, you can see that there's a lot of steps for the production cycle. So after knitting, you have cutting of the fabric based on your patterns. You have to manually fold the fabric and manually cut it, usually with the rotary cutters. Framing, steam setting, removing the frame, cutting the fabric with a marker, You have to overlock the shoulder seams, sleeves, bar tacking, sewing neck trim. Then you have a second press, attaching labels, finishing. That's a lot of steps for cut and sew. So when we look at that compared to seamless, it's a lot fewer steps because you are eliminating a lot of the seams and eliminating a lot of the processes that go before you even put the seams together. And so you just have knitting and then you have your steam setting and then you can, cut your shoulders and sew all of the other parts together, your second press, your labels and finishing. So it's a lot less processes here. Now I'm going to hand it off to Sabrina. She's going to talk about our other way of knitting machines used for shapewear.
All righty, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about warp knitting. So I think that Alexis did a really great job talking to you about circular knitting and body mapping and how that might be used to create unique garments. So with warp knitting, our loops are formed in the warp or the vertical direction parallel to the direction that the fabric is being formed. With warp knitting, all of our needles are knitting all at the same time, and the needles are forming stitches with the help of guide bars. These fabrics can often be used in leggings and sports bras. Warp knitting fabric has some very unique characteristics, which I'm going to highlight in a minute. One of the things that we get out of warp knit fabric is because those stitches are formed in that vertical direction, often warp knit fabrics have more stretch in the length than in the width, which can sometimes give them a little bit more of a compressive feel, as well as that extra length allows us to be able to put that strap or that sleeve over in a swimsuit or in body wear. Now let's look at what a warp knit machine looks like and how different it was from those examples of those circular knit machines. In a warp knit machine, we have thousands of yarns going across the width, and they have to use thousands of ends of yarn. One machine may have as many as 9,000 ends of yarn being fed into this machine. Each yarn is being fed to an individual needle. So basically, this is pretty complicated, friends, and these machines move very, very quickly, very fast. And one of the things I want to highlight in this picture is how this warp knit machine over the side, you can see how wide it is and how it knits fully open versus a circular knit, which knits in a tube. But we also have the flexibility to be able to put a cutter or a slitter on at the machine to change the width of the fabric. So for shapewear or bodywear, or smaller garments, we could actually cut that full width in 3 different rolls to be able to increase our cutting efficiency. So these are huge machines, take a long time to set up, but are extremely efficient. And so when we look at further into warp knitting machines and some of the differences, there's 2 different classifications of warp knitting machines, which I'm going to talk to you about in a second. But why do we use it in shapewear? So I already mentioned the fact that the fabric could be split at the machine in different widths to improve the cutting efficiency. But the other thing that's really cool about warp knitting is because of the way those stitches are formed and it zigzags back and forth, and you may have different types of yarns and different constructions layered on top of each other in the construction, warp knits typically don't unravel and curl. So I've got a warp knit seamless garment here beside me, and the end of the sleeve was just cut raw and it was left unfinished. And I can't unravel it, and you don't see that traditional curl that you sometimes see in a jersey circular knit structure. So as you could imagine, if you have small pieces in sports bras or shapewear, and those are stacked in a factory, that lack of curling and that lack of running would allow it to be easier to be processed. Warp knits also don't have a traditional direction. You can't see those V's of those stitches, so you can nest those together. And warp knitting will allow me to be able to create very open holes. I've got a warp knit seamless garment here, And warp knit structures will allow me to create true open holes with the way those stitches are formed. And then I've already mentioned that they have more length stretch than width. Now there's two different kinds of warp knitting machines. There's our tricots, which do our most basic fabrics, and we do our reshels, which can do our more complicated fabrics. So I'm highlighted a little bit about the two differences. Tricots are great for doing pocket liners, some swimwear, some activewear applications. But if you want to do more complicated fabrics, like lace or fancy jacquard patterns, warp knit seamless, we're going to want to use the reshell. The tricot process, the way the fabric is being knitted, the fabric and the yarn is under a lot of stress because of the angle in which it's being knit and taken up, while a reshell has a little bit more of a gentle tension on the yarn and the fabric and the take up, which allows us more flexibility with our design. Reshell machines also can allow us to possibly use spun yarns in addition to filament. So in around the early 2000s, at one of the international textile shows, a new machine was introduced by Carl Meyer, which allowed us to be able to do very interesting jacquard warp knitting and actually produce seamless product. So this new machine that was launched had two jacquards for a double knit machine. So we had two beds of needles, two separate jacquards. This would allow us now to knit tubes of fabric with the warp knit machine on each of our needle beds and then join them together in a tube to be able to make seamless garments. These machines were extremely fast and were a lot faster compared to our traditional weft knit counterparts. So I wanted to show you a little bit of an example of what this might look like. So using that reshell machine with that double jacquard head, this is a seamless garment being produced. So you can see the fabric is being knit in the form of a tube and coming off the machine. You can see the marks on the fabric where the fabric could then be cut and separated. So this particular garment that I'm showing you right now was knit on a machine in a tube. And then after it's being knit, those little connector yarns would be separated, and we can make incredible seamless garments with this technology. Now, typically, warp knit fabrics are only used for synthetic, and that is because with spun fabrics that may be using natural yarn, there's a lot of lint pollution that can happen on these machines. So with a spun yarn, those small fibers will get up into the air, fall onto the machine, and cause contamination, as well as the warp knitting process is very fast and can be a lot of tension on those fabrics. And so there has been a trend that we've been seeing happening with the push for natural and spun fibers in performance garments, that we're seeing warp knitting companies experimenting as the technology is changing with our warp knit machines to allow us to be able to do spun yarns on these machines. In order to make that happen, the yarn has to use longer staple spun yarns, as well as look to processes like zero spinning, which is a special spinning process that also uses longer staple yarn to create a much stronger spun yarn, as well as using special partitions around the knitting machine. Kind of imagine a plastic greenhouse over this warp knitting machine to keep that fiber confined and not pollute any others. And then also the use of very special, very fine yarn sizes, perhaps 80s or 100 singles. Now, we also highlighted at the beginning, we were talking about the importance of performance for fabrics being used in body and shapewear. And I wanted to highlight two technologies that Cotton Incorporated has worked on to try to improve the moisture management of cotton. So cotton naturally has great breathability and wicking in fabrics. But what we want to see in performance fabrics is we want to increase the moisture's ability to spread out on the outer surface or the face of the fabric. And that's what these two technologies do. Trans dry and wicking windows both allow cotton fabrics to dry faster and absorb less, helping you feel more comfortable, as well as by using water-resistant treatments on the cotton fiber in strategic ways, help encourage the moisture to spread out and push that moisture or that sweat away from the skin to the outer part of your garment or to the face of the fabric to make you feel more comfortable. So both of them are using a push-pull method to move that moisture and that sweat to the outer areas of the garment and help you feel dry. So trans dry is using a water-resistant chemistry on strategic yarns to be able to reduce the water absorbency of certain cotton yarns while using natural cotton yarns in conjunction with them in a special structure. So this is done at a yarn level. Wicking windows is a technology that is done through printing, which prints on the back side of the garment or the fabric a water-resistant print, which then reduces the absorbency and the cling of this fabric and moves that moisture to the face of the garment to allow it to have better moisture management. So now I'm going to hand this back over to Alexis to share a little bit more with you.
Great, thank you. So let's see if this goes to the next slide. There we go. So piggybacking on that idea from our material library has a lot of featured fabrics for leggings and shapewear that we use commonly, offering natural fiber solutions in categories that are long derived by synthetic fibers. And so we see a lot of stretch and recovery, softness, support for all-day comfort and breathability that all comes from cotton as a natural fiber. And we see a demand for sustainability. So the use of cotton is something, and natural fibers is increasingly something that we see consumers wanting, because the use of natural fibers like cotton has sustainability benefits. It's also microplastic free, which is supported by our data, and biodegradable and recyclable. And so we love all of those things when we hear about natural fibers. And so place that with shapewear that sits really close to the body, you have less irritation and it supports your skin health. So just a little bit on the microplastic concerns. I just wanted to highlight a couple of things as we see about 46% of synthetic fibers detaching from clothing during washing, and that's a main concern from consumers. And it actually impacts our entire lives because it's in our water supply. And so we see that it's impacting human health because of the microplastics in our clothing. And it's not just clothing, obviously, there's microplastics being leached in other types of materials, but we're, for our purposes, talking about clothing here. And so we really like to see a push for natural fibers just from that microplastic pollution information that we know. Again, skin sensitivities and allergies. I love to harp on this because, wrapping yourself in plastic isn't really great for your health. You really want to use something like, that's sitting against your body all day. And this is not, you're not just wearing shapewear and leggings just for your workouts anymore. We're seeing it being brought into loungewear and maybe into the office. So you really want something that is hyperallergenic and it gives key advantages to your body, as well as washes off clean of odor. So a lot of synthetic fibers capture that odor, and it's really, really hard to wash it away unless you add some kind of enzyme to it. And so we really like cotton for the fact that it can wash completely clean of odor, and it keeps your shapewear fresher for longer. And so cotton we see is completely non-irritating, even to those with sensitive skin. Cotton is very breathable. It wicks moisture and has softness, which makes it ideal for prolonged wear. And again, we see it a lot as the consumer wants more activewear garments to be used with natural fibers and cottons and blends like that. I want to jump into body mapping. It's a really big trend that we see in shapewear. Body mapping has two functions. We like to improve functional aspects of the product and also improve aesthetic. And so we see decreased waste as a functional aspect, increased comfort, reinforce areas of high wear and abrasion, and we can improve performance by body mapping certain functional zones. Aesthetically, you have to accentuate your shape, accentuate movement, removing of seams, so it's a lot more comfortable. So body mapping or engineered designing enables strategic placement of various knit structures within the shape of the product in order to improve performance and comfort by reinforcing areas of high impact, abrasion, and wear, and improve comfort for better fit and dexterity. Normally, for two different stitch structures like this, you would normally cut and sew something like that. But if removing the seams, you can body map it within the machine function, you have better garments that way, more comfortable, less abrasion. So really what we see in body mapping here is I can create a BMP file that specifically tells the next person touching the garment, where to cut, what is what. And so this is usually predetermined by your stitch count, by your body size of your cylinder, and your panel dimensions that you need at finished garment. So in body mapping, we usually typically do the artwork in pixels. So we already know the predetermined cylinder has, let's say, 500 needles in the round. That means our artwork has to be 500 pixels wide, and say our finished garment length is 300 courses. So we need 300 pixels in the length. And then we can figure out where the placement of all of these different stitch structures are, and we color code it like this. So here's another example of that same bra that we like to see. You can see all the predetermined cut lines, your logo placement, everything is marked out, and you can also see the computer view that the programmer has. So we have functional parts of the garment, which is no side seams for increased comfortability. You only have seaming at the neckline and armholes. It's body mapped at the bust cup placement to help support your shape. The 1x1 mock rib at center front also helps support and shaping, and the welt at the bottom hem that's knit on the machine to remove the seam and provide comfort. So aesthetically, it's a more flattering fit. You have a lot of textural interest added due to the body mapped stitch selections and yarn selections. You have intarsia design and logo placement. So a lot of aesthetic and functional things happening within this one garment, and it's just coming off the machine as a tube, and you cut and sew the finishing there. So lastly, seamless body map technologies, we see an increase in comfort, overall fit, increase with better performance zones and body mapped areas, and a decrease when you're sewing and the assembly line, a decrease in waste, a decrease in pattern piece reduction, and a reduced bulk from the seams, and you have less chafing from places like waistbands and cut and sew seams that you usually put in there. I think, and Sabrina will go through body mapping on warp.
Yeah, just to highlight what she was just talking about, here's some great examples of how you might body map on warp. This was done by an amazing Italian company, Shifra. And we just wanted to highlight some examples of how they leverage the warp knit's ability to be able to do open holes and body map that in, creating those tubes to be able to make that seamless product, and then being able to knit that off the machine finish it, and then be able to cut those to separate them. Here are some examples of some seamless leggings. As you can see, they're knitting it in a tube, and then that space in between the legs would then be cut off with additional processing to be able to make those leggings. Another trend we just wanted to highlight, that since leggings are not just for working out anymore, people are wearing them all over the place, just their need to express with amazing prints, heathers, overdye heathers, and metallic prints. Like these have become fashion pieces and not just workout wear. And we're also seeing this at some of the fabric fairs that we're going to. Just recently at Functional Fabric Fair in Portland, I visited the Bodywear and Shapewear Forum and Pavilion and saw some of the latest fabrics, aesthetics, and in trends in knitting, as well as printing and finishing with garments. So we're continuing to see those kind of trends. So that concludes our webinar from today. So we want to see if we have any questions before we wrap it up. And we really appreciate your time today and coming to join us.
Thank you, Sabrina and Alexis, for today's presentation. This time, we're going to open up to some questions that came in. So would you say that cotton has an impact on how these garments are constructed at all?
I would say so. I think that when you have something that's made in cotton, you really just kind of think about how the construction is. And I think that it's more breathable as well. So you can, limit different areas that you put in, I guess. I would say that I like to knit in completely seamless when you can, because eliminating seams is just very important to comfortability.
Thank you for that. Would you say that cotton shapewear can be dried? Are there any concerns of shrinkage at all?
Oh, with your question was around shrinkage concerns with cotton.
Yes, with
Cotton
foam
shapewear.
welding. Yeah.
Yeah, so typically what we're going to do in shapewear, in order to have that move with you, we're going to include a spandex. And spandex is considered a thermoplastic yarn, so we can take it up to temperature and have it hold its shape. And so by adding a little bit of spandex to a cotton product, we can have that thermoplastic, which will help reduce shrinkage.
Great. And then the last question we have, are there any concerns of snagging for these fabrics?
In general with shapewear or with cotton shapewear?
In cotton shapewear. I guess
Yes.
in general too as well, but since this webinar is specific to cotton, we want to keep it to cotton.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, so cotton being a spun yarns are less likely to have snagging in them than filament yarns, where the filaments can actually get separated. What would you like to add on that one, Alexis?
Or also stitch structure also makes a big difference. So if you have a lot of floats or something in the back of the fabric, it might snag a little easier. So, avoiding things that have big, long floats would probably also be a way to eliminate snagging.
Great. We actually just had a really good question come in as well. With seamless, would you say that spandex is needed all the time, or ways to create seamless garments without the use of spandex?
I mean, I would say for shapewear and bodywear, you would like to add a little bit of spandex so that you don't get bagging out and you get some stretch and recovery. You can do it without, but maybe on products that are not so close fitting to the body. Yeah.
Any thoughts, Sabrina, on that one?
I think the other advantage that you have with adding a little spandex to the fabric is snag resistance and a little bit with durability as well. When you add a little bit of spandex, it shortens that stitch length and you reduce your snagging. And we want these to be more durable so that they don't find themselves in the landfill.
Yeah. Well, thank you both again today for your. I know that everyone really enjoyed this webinar. The reminder, a recording of this webinar will be made available on cottonworks.com, and we thank you for joining. Until the next one, this webinar has now concluded.